Dear viewers across the world, most welcome to my channel NAGA World Conflict Zone. Palestine and Israel context. Palestine's being failed again by world in effective language. A troubling lexicon is trotted out during and after every Israeli fire on Gaza, with politicians and journalists helping to create an echo chamber of meaningless blandishment. This may appear harmless to the uninitiated, but they obscure the reality of events and processes on the ground. They entrench a dangerous, violent status quo that leaves millions of Palestinians under occupations, subjugations, and discriminations. Let's start with some classes. Calm, quiet, or a return to the normal. The New York Times this week ran an otherwise excellent article entitled "The Years of Quiet Israeli-Palestine Conflict Exploded. Why now?" Various states have called for calm. You also get Israel vows to restore calm. Deploying my conflict translator here, one finds that calm and quiet are luxurious reserved for Israeli. Palestinians have not enjoyed calm or decades. Israel will once the bombing and the rocketing and return to a life of seeking Carpathians in their cafes in Tel Aviv, largely unaware of conflict or tensions. Grateful that they no longer have to rush to bomb shelter or spend sleepless night worrying about loved one. Palestinians will have no such luxury. Family wait for the bulldozers. Mothers will wonder if their children will make it back home from school every day, or whether Israeli soldier will crash into their homes in one of their many midnight arrests, ready to pick up kids accused of throwing stones. Palestine's villagers wonder if they can pick their olives without being attacked by armed Israeli settlers. Calm in this narrative is an Israeli right, not a Palestine's one. In highlights one crucial element of this conflict, media coverage, especially in the US, ignores the issue of Palestinians until Israelis are under attack. Politicians all too often are guilty of the same offense. If Palestine's rights are being systematically ignored, it does not register. So mass coverage offers a narrative of Palestine's actions and Israeli reactions, as if the Hamas rockets were the cause of the conflict, as opposed to being a symptom, as every day is an assault on Palestinians. Where do you choose to start the timeline? Palestinians might say 1948 or even 1917. De-escalation is another term used in a similar vein, along with both sides must do this or that, as if two sides were equal parties, not occupier against occupied. This is ever present in diplospeak. Here again, these escalations only refers to the bomb and rockets. It ignores the daily aggressions of ethnic cleansing occupations and says against Palestinians. More than 50 years of Military occupation is an aggression. Living under hostile foreign military rules is an act of violence. True de-escalation, one that will mean anything at all to Palestinians, must include complete and final end to the demolitions, forcibly transfer and land theft, as well as the annulment of all discriminatory laws that gives more rights to Jews than Palestinians. Then we get Israel has a right to defend itself. Have you heard any single Western leader speak of a Palestinian right to self-defense? Israel has this right like any state, but is that what is going on? The evidence from the 2006, 2008 and 9, 2012, 2014 and 2018 wars on Gaza shows that Israeli forces never restricts themselves to act of self-defense in line with the legal requirement of distinctions, precautions and proportionality. U.S. President Joe Biden reiterates his support for Israel's right to self-defense, but never say anything about Palestinians' right. In fact, the White House has expressed most concern to Israel about protecting journalists than Palestinian civilians. European Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen was no better. She used that dreaded word concern and did not bother to mention Palestinians. When leaders utter the word Israel has the right to self-defense with no reference to Palestine's rights, it is just a green light for Israel to smash Gaza. What Israel is defending is its system of apartheid, occupations, siege and subjugations. If Palestinians have the temperament to protest and mobilize against these, Israeli forces use brutal force to intimidate and terrorize those involved. Hamas and other armed groups fire rockets, mortar fire and incendiary balloons at Israeli civilians, which is both illegal and futile. And it also triggered the colossal Israeli bombardment that inevitably follows. Israel is permitted under international law to target a person launching a rocket. But minimal effort is made to avoid civilian fatalities. Israel's actions collectively punish 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, while the blockade also performs this purpose. Israeli strategists openly speak of the need to mow the lawn in Gaza every few years. It was then Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman who best summed up the Israeli positions back in 2018. There were no innocent people in the Gaza Strip. A successor, Naftali Bennett, boasted, "I have killed lots of Arabs in my life and there's no problem with that." Anti-Semitism is also much used, often abused too. Combating it is vital. But when did a major Western political leaders talk about racism against Arab? We heard that the Arab being chanted in Jerusalem again. Lens mobs dragged people out of cars just because they looked Arab. Yet, there is a stance of racism in terms of seeing Arab fatalities in Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen as mere numbers. Anti-Arab sentiment is arguably the least talked about form of racism on the planet, even though it is one of the most pervasive. But the regime of apartheid has to aim to bring calm and to de-escalate, to build healthy relations between all who lives between its Mediterranean and Jordan River. Only then should there be talk of another favorite term, coexistence. Occupations and coexistence are like oil and water, they do not always mix. The international community has to dismantle this regime, not least when the occupied and subjugated have no means to do so. Palestinians cannot negotiate their way out of this, nor can they win any military confrontation against Israel. Language is reflective of a mindset of the international community that explains why most major actors will again fail to do what is necessary to bring about genuine peace and justice for all. When the bombing stops, political leaders just move on to the next issue and forget the Palestinians living under the Israeli boot. Unless political leaders start acting on achieving Palestine's right, not just Israel, we shall be forced to relive this horror in the next few years, while Palestinians will live the horror of apartheid and occupation every single hours of every day. We who know, but might one day we hear an American president support Palestine's freedom. Chris Doyle is director of the London-based Council for Arab-British Understanding.